You going to jail.
I don't give a
They're going to jail. She just threw another rock at me, as you can see. She's slashing my tires. She's slashing my tires. Her and her cousin slashing my tires. As you can see, I have a gun in my purse. They're trying to make me out the car. He's busting my window again. Going to jail. You going to jail. Okay. You going to jail.
On a summer night in Cincinnati, a confrontation in a parking lot lasted only a few minutes, but the questions it raised would remain for much longer. By the time police arrived, 2 women had been shot. One would spend weeks fighting for her life, and a homicide investigation was underway. At first, the case appeared straightforward. Then videos recorded during the incident began to surface, showing pieces of what happened before the gunfire. Those recordings, combined with witness statements, physical evidence, and competing accounts, would transform the investigation into a debate over what truly unfolded in those final moments. Prosecutors believe the shooting was a deliberate killing. The defense insisted it was a lawful act of self-defense. As detectives reconstructed the timeline, every detail became critical, from damaged property to split-second decisions. This is the story of Nyema Norton. Hello, and welcome to Only Crime Stories. Before we continue, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss a new case. Before her name became part of court records and news headlines, Nyema Norton was known simply as a young woman living her life in Cincinnati. At 29 years old, she was part of a community where familiar faces crossed paths every day, and relationships, both good and bad, often developed over time. Like anyone else, she had routines, people she knew, and plans that stretched beyond a single day. Those ordinary details would later be overshadowed by the events that unfolded in the summer of 2024. When investigators began piecing together what happened, they quickly realized this was not a case involving strangers. The people at the center of the confrontation already knew one another. Their connection had existed long before the shooting, and according to information later presented in court, there had been ongoing tension between them. That history became an important part of understanding why investigators looked beyond the final moments and examined what had happened in the weeks and months leading up to the encounter. As the investigation continued, Nyema's life was increasingly described through evidence.
Jay Clark has a lot of experience dealing with cases like this. And again, we want to warn you, the video in this story is disturbing. It shows the confrontation between Fletcher, Norton, and another woman. In the video, Norton is seen holding a knife and a rock. In her Facebook post, Fletcher says she was being, quote, attacked. She claims her tires were slashed, windows smashed, and a rock was being thrown at her. Now, after watching my report and playing Fletcher's video several times, Clark believes Fletcher does have a solid self-defense case.
Hit me again. Hit me again.
One of these shots allegedly killed Nyema Norton, and the woman charged in her murder is the person recording.
You should be happy. You should be happy you don't get clapped. You should be happy you don't get clapped. You should be happy you don't get clapped.
The confrontation played out on Akira Fletcher's phone, posted as 2 clips on Facebook. Jay Clark believes this one alone is enough to prove Fletcher acted in self-defense.
Basically, it's a new sequence of events at that point because they had disengaged. She had walked off, she tried to drive off. Well, now she's approaching.
It shows Fletcher's driver's side window smashed as Norton approaches her vehicle, appearing to reach for something before Fletcher allegedly fires the fatal shots.
Right there, you can see the arm start to come up as she turns to swing it.
Clark says the prosecution will have to prove Fletcher's use of deadly force was not in self-defense. All it takes is proving beyond a reasonable doubt at least one of 5 things. Fletcher created the situation. She did not have reasonable grounds to believe she was in danger of death or great bodily harm, that she did not have an honest belief of being in danger of death or great bodily harm, that she violated a duty to retreat to avoid the danger, or that she used unreasonable force. Based on those elements, Clark says Fletcher has a solid case. He does not believe Fletcher was the aggressor.
Now, you can say she got out and was running her mouth, but words alone are not enough.
He thinks Norton escalated the situation when she returned to Fletcher's car.
And did she use a reasonable force? At best, the state could argue, well, she had a brick, you didn't have to shoot her. Any cop will tell you a blunt object is just as dangerous as a gun.
He says because Fletcher's tires were flat, she likely couldn't drive away. But under Ohio's standard ground law, she didn't have to.
She was in her car. She had a right to be. She had no obligation to retreat.
Witness interviews and courtroom testimony. Public attention shifted toward legal arguments, video recordings, and forensic findings. Yet before any of those details existed, there was a person whose future ended unexpectedly. The criminal case would eventually focus on questions of self-defense and the actions taken during a rapidly unfolding confrontation. But the loss of a life remained the starting point of the story. Understanding who Nyema was and recognizing that the individuals involved shared a history is essential before examining the violence itself. Cases like this rarely begin with a single moment. They are often shaped by earlier interactions, unresolved conflicts, and decisions that build over time. To understand how an ordinary day turned into a homicide investigation that would later divide public opinion, the story must begin with the relationship between Nyema Norton and Akira Fletcher, and how that relationship gradually moved toward a point of no return. As investigators worked backward from the shooting, they found that the confrontation behind the Avondale Town Center was not an isolated encounter. Court proceedings later showed that the two women had a history that stretched back before July 2024. That earlier relationship became an important part of explaining why prosecutors and defense attorneys interpreted the same event in very different ways. Akira Fletcher, who was 23 years old at the time of the shooting, would eventually become the focus of the criminal investigation. After Nyema Norton's death, she faced serious charges, including aggravated murder and murder. But long before those charges were filed, both sides acknowledged that the women were already familiar with one another. During pretrial hearings and the trial itself, the defense introduced evidence describing previous encounters between them. Attorneys argued that Fletcher believed earlier incidents had created an ongoing threat, pointing to allegations that Norton had previously intimidated or threatened her. Prosecutors, meanwhile, focused on the events of the shooting itself and sought to prove that the use of deadly force was not legally justified. Because of those competing narratives, investigators had to examine more than the physical evidence collected at the scene. They reviewed the history between the two women, searching for anything that could explain how a disagreement ultimately became a deadly encounter. Every prior interaction suddenly carried new significance, not because it changed what happened that afternoon, but because it shaped how each side explained the decisions made in the final moments. With that background established, attention turns to July 12, 2024, the day both women arrived near the Avondale Town Center, where confrontation unfolds in full view of witnesses and eventually becomes the centerpiece of a closely watched courtroom battle. By the afternoon of July 12, 2024, the long-running dispute between Nyema Norton and Akira Fletcher was about to move from past allegations to a real-time confrontation. The location was behind the Avondale Town Center in Cincinnati, an area where the encounter would unfold quickly and leave investigators with a complex sequence of events to reconstruct. According to evidence later presented in court, Fletcher was inside her vehicle when Norton and another woman approached. What started as a face-to-face encounter soon escalated beyond a verbal disagreement. Witness accounts, physical evidence, and video recordings would later help investigators establish the order in which events occurred, though each piece of evidence answered some questions while raising others. The vehicle quickly became a central focus of the investigation. Prosecutors and defense attorneys agreed that significant damage occurred during the confrontation, but they differed on what that damage meant. Windows were broken, rocks were thrown, and the condition of the vehicle became an important part of the evidence reviewed by detectives and later shown to the jury. Rather than leaving the scene or relying only on witness testimony, Fletcher used her cell phone to record portions of the encounter. At that moment, it was impossible to know that those recordings would later become some of the most closely examined pieces of evidence in the entire case. Every movement captured on video would eventually be slowed down, replayed, and analyzed inside a courtroom. The confrontation reached its most critical point in a matter of moments. By then, investigators determined that the situation had moved well beyond a verbal dispute. The damaged vehicle, the actions of those involved, and the limited time available for decisions would later become the focus of detailed courtroom analysis. Evidence presented during the trial indicated that Norton continued moving toward Fletcher's vehicle as the confrontation intensified. The defense argued that Fletcher was effectively confined inside the vehicle while its windows were being struck and damaged. Prosecutors, however, examined whether the circumstances justified the use of deadly force under Ohio law. Among the physical evidence discussed at trial was a knife that investigators said Norton possessed during the encounter. Combined with the damaged vehicle and cell phone recordings, that evidence became central to the defense's claim that Fletcher believed she faced an immediate threat. Jurors would later spend considerable time reviewing those details alongside witness testimony and forensic evidence. As the confrontation unfolded, Fletcher fired multiple shots. The gunfire struck Norton and another woman who was present during the incident. Within seconds, the confrontation ended, leaving behind a scene that detectives would spend months reconstructing piece by piece. For responding officers, the immediate priority was no longer determining how the conflict began, but preserving the evidence exactly as they found it. Every shell casing, every piece of shattered glass, every damaged section of the vehicle, and every recorded video would become part of an investigation that was only beginning. As first responders secured the area behind the Avondale Town Center, investigators began documenting every detail before the scene changed. Detectives photographed the damaged vehicle, collected spent shell casings, recovered physical evidence, and interviewed witnesses who had either seen the confrontation or arrived moments afterward. The goal was to establish a timeline based on evidence rather than assumptions. Nyema Norton and the second woman were transported to the hospital for emergency treatment. While detectives continued processing the crime scene, medical personnel focused on stabilizing both victims. At that stage, the investigation centered on a non-fatal shooting, and officers worked to determine exactly how the confrontation had escalated so rapidly. As the days passed, investigators continued reviewing cell phone recordings, examining forensic evidence, and comparing witness statements with the physical evidence collected at the scene. Each new piece of information helped clarify parts of the encounter while leaving other questions unresolved. The case remained active as detectives waited for updates on Norton's condition. More than a month after the shooting, the investigation changed course. On August 24, 2024, Nyema Norton died from the injuries she had sustained during the confrontation. Her death transformed the legal landscape of the case. What had initially been investigated as a shooting now became a homicide investigation, requiring prosecutors and detectives to reassess the evidence under a different legal standard. Following Nyema Norton's death, prosecutors presented the case to a Hamilton County grand jury. After reviewing the evidence gathered during the investigation, the grand jury returned an indictment against Akira Fletcher. She was formally charged with aggravated murder, and 2 counts of felonious assault in connection with the shooting. With the indictment in place, the investigation entered a new stage. Detectives were no longer focused solely on reconstructing the crime scene. They now worked alongside prosecutors to organize witness testimony, forensic findings, medical records, and digital evidence that would eventually be presented in court. Every document, photograph, and recorded statement became part of a growing case file. Fletcher pleaded not guilty to the charges. From the beginning, her defense maintained that the shooting was a lawful act of self-defense. That position meant the legal battle would center on more than the fact that shots had been fired. Instead, the court would have to determine whether Fletcher reasonably believed she faced an immediate threat of serious bodily harm at the moment she pulled the trigger. As both sides prepared for trial, investigators continued reviewing the evidence from multiple angles. They compared witness accounts with physical evidence collected at the scene and carefully examined the sequence of events captured on video. Rather than simplifying the case, each review highlighted how quickly the confrontation had unfolded and how differently the same evidence could be interpreted. As the case moved toward trial, one piece of evidence received more attention than any other: cell phone recordings captured during the confrontation. Unlike witness testimony, which can differ from person to person, the videos preserved parts of the encounter as they unfolded. Investigators, attorneys, and later the jury examined those recordings repeatedly, comparing them with the physical evidence collected from the scene. The footage was not viewed in isolation. Detectives matched what appeared on the recordings with photographs of the damaged vehicle, forensic reports, and witness statements. Broken windows, shattered glass, and objects striking the vehicle were all considered alongside the videos to establish the sequence of events. For the defense, the recordings supported the argument that Fletcher faced an immediate and escalating threat. Attorneys pointed to the condition of the vehicle and the actions visible in the footage as evidence that she believed she had little time to react. Prosecutors, however, analyzed the same recordings to determine whether the circumstances met the legal standard required to justify deadly force. The videos became more than visual evidence. They formed the timeline around which much of the trial revolved. Jurors were asked to study brief moments in detail, evaluating not only what happened, but also how those events would have been perceived by the people involved. As both sides built their cases, the courtroom discussion expanded beyond the recordings themselves. Attention turned to the legal question that would ultimately decide the outcome: whether Ohio law recognized Fletcher's actions as lawful self-defense. That issue would soon become the central focus of the trial, shaping every argument that followed. As the trial progressed, the central issue was no longer whether Akira Fletcher fired the shots. That fact was not in dispute. Instead, the courtroom focused on why she fired them and whether her actions met the legal requirements for self-defense under Ohio law. The defense argued that the confrontation had reached a point where Fletcher believed she was in immediate danger. Attorneys pointed to the damage inflicted on her vehicle, the evidence discussed during the investigation, and the events captured on cell phone recordings. They maintained that the combination of those circumstances caused Fletcher to believe she faced a threat of serious bodily harm, leaving her with only moments to make a decision. Prosecutors approached the same facts from a different perspective. Their responsibility was to convince the jury that the evidence did not justify the use of deadly force. To do so, they carefully analyzed the sequence of events, questioned how the confrontation developed, and challenged whether the legal standard for self-defense had been met. Jurors were instructed to evaluate every piece of evidence together rather than relying on any single detail. Physical evidence, witness testimony, medical findings, and video recordings all had to be considered as part of one continuous timeline. The case ultimately depended on whether the prosecution could disprove the claim of self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt. As those legal arguments unfolded, another subject entered the courtroom. Attorneys began examining the history between Fletcher and Nyema Norton, arguing that earlier encounters helped explain how each woman viewed the confrontation. That background became another important factor the jury had to consider before reaching a verdict. To understand the decisions made on July 12th, the court also examined events that occurred before the shooting. Both the prosecution and the defense agreed that the confrontation did not emerge without context. The disagreement centered on how much that history should influence the jury's interpretation of the final encounter. During the proceedings, the defense presented evidence and testimony describing previous interactions between Akira Fletcher and Nyema Norton. According to the defense, those earlier incidents contributed to Fletcher's belief that the danger she perceived during the confrontation was real and immediate. Attorneys argued that a person's assessment of a threat is shaped not only by what happens in the moment, but also by prior experiences involving the same individuals. Prosecutors acknowledged that the women knew each other, but emphasized that the jury's primary task was to evaluate the actions taken during the shooting itself. They argued that regardless of any earlier disputes, the evidence from that day had to satisfy the legal requirements governing the use of deadly force. As jurors listened to testimony, they were asked to weigh both perspectives carefully. The earlier relationship between the two women did not determine the verdict on its own, but became part of the broader picture presented throughout the trial. It added another layer to a case that already involved video evidence, forensic analysis, and conflicting interpretations of the same sequence of events. When the trial began, months of investigative work were brought into a courtroom where every detail would be examined under legal standards rather than public opinion. The prosecution and defense presented the same incident through different interpretations, asking jurors to decide whether the evidence proved an unlawful killing or a legally justified act of self-defense. Detectives describe how they processed the crime scene and documented the physical evidence. Medical experts explain the injuries sustained during the shooting and how those injuries led to Nyema Norton's death weeks later. Forensic evidence was introduced to help establish the sequence of events, while witness testimony was compared against photographs, reports, and digital recordings collected during the investigation. One of the trial's defining features was the repeated review of the cell phone videos recorded during the confrontation. Jurors watched the footage alongside other evidence instead of considering it on its own. Attorneys paused at key moments, highlighting details they believed supported their respective arguments. Even brief actions captured in the recordings became subjects of careful examination. Throughout the proceedings, the judge instructed jurors that their responsibility was to evaluate the evidence as a whole. They were not deciding whether the confrontation had occurred. That was undisputed. Instead, they had to determine whether the prosecution had met its burden of proving that Fletcher's actions were not protected by Ohio's self-defense law. After reviewing the testimony, physical evidence, forensic findings, and cell phone recordings, the jury reached its decision. In June 2025, Akira Fletcher was found not guilty of aggravated murder, and 2 counts of felonious assault. The verdict meant the prosecution had not convinced the jury beyond a reasonable doubt that Fletcher's actions fell outside the protections of Ohio's self-defense law. The decision brought the criminal proceedings to a close, but it did not end public discussion surrounding the case. The outcome prompted renewed debate about how self-defense claims are evaluated, particularly when video evidence captures only part of a rapidly unfolding confrontation. Supporters of the verdict argued that the evidence demonstrated Fletcher reasonably believed she faced an immediate threat. Others continue to question whether the use of deadly force was necessary under the circumstances. Although the courtroom process ended with an acquittal, the case remains significant because it illustrated how physical evidence, digital recordings, witness testimony, and legal standards can lead to a result that differs from initial public expectations. The death of Nyema Norton remains the central fact of this case. The legal system reached its conclusion, but the events of July 12, 2024, continue to be examined as an example of the difficult questions surrounding self-defense, evidence, and the burden of proof in criminal trials. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true crime stories. See you in the next case.